Hi, I'm Elizabeth, and I wanted to jump on here and talk a little bit about stress and burnout and the stress cycle. So, I'm just going to preface this by saying this is not my work. This is the work of Dr. Emily Nagoski, who has an incredible body of work around burnout and stress, and really where we need to be focusing our efforts when we're under chronic stress. I want to do a bit of an overview here because this is a topic I find fascinating, and I just think everybody needs to know about this. So let's define a couple things. First of all, stress versus stressor. So a stressor is something that you experience, you might see or feel or hear or taste or something that is going to cause a stress response in your body. Okay, so there are two separate things. We experience a lot of stressors, which cause a lot of stress for us. The other thing I want to talk about is with the stress response in your body, there's three options. So there's fight, flight, or freeze. And your body is actually going to determine which one is most appropriate for any given situation. So fight, flight, or freeze. The third thing I want to kind of define is acute versus chronic stressors. So an acute stressor is something that we experience in the short term. It's something that usually has a beginning, a middle, and an end, whereas chronic stressors tend to be ongoing, long term, and not really have an end in sight often. So, the stress situation I often talk about when I'm explaining this to people is, let's say you're walking across the street and you look over and you see a car coming at you. Okay. That is an incredibly stressful situation. Before you have even had a chance to process that in your conscious mind, your body's reacting. The first step is there's a stressor that is threatening your life, potentially. The second step in your body is a flood of hormones get released. So you've got adrenaline, you've got cortisol, all sorts of things are happening in your body. All these signals are going on to do all sorts of stuff. So it increases your heart rate, it increases your breathing, it increases your blood pressure, your muscles get tense. Your liver is actually going to dump a bunch of blood sugar into your bloodstream so that your heart and your lungs and your muscles all have fuel to use to get out of there. And this causes a spike in blood sugar. So that can be an issue with chronic stress. And then the third step is that, so you race across the street, you get on the sidewalk, the car drives by, you're safe, you're sound, you're fine. And that's the resolution. So the third step in acute stress is the resolution. I'm okay. But let's talk about chronic stress for a minute, because let's say there's all sorts of things that we experience that could be considered chronic stress. So your job, commuting, parenting, relationships, all of these things can be considered chronic stress. So let's talk about work. Let's say that you have a really stressful job and walking into your office every day, you just have this pit in your stomach and you think of all the responsibility that you have and all of the problems you're going to face in the day and all of the meetings and all the deadlines and all of the documents and the things that need to be filed, right? And you leave the office at the end of the day and you drive home and you get home and there's all sorts of responsibilities waiting there for you too. So you've got kids and you've got to make dinner and you've got all the things happening all of the time. So going into the office may trigger a stress response. So that may trigger your increased blood pressure, increased heart rate, your increased blood sugar. That may happen. We know this is common knowledge that high levels of stress and high blood pressure go hand in hand, right? And this is why. What's different about the chronic stress is that it never ends. So you get home and you don't think, oh, I'm safe, I'm done, I'm out of it. You just go into the next chronic stressor. And that lets the stress hormones just continue to cycle through our body. So the way to beat burnout is to end that chronic stress cycle. Okay, so when you get home, knowing that you need to end that cycle is going to help reduce your stress levels. So how on earth do we do that? The first step is to be aware of it, right? You can't end your chronic stress if you don't know what your stressors are, if you don't know how they're impacting you, right? If you know that you hold tension in your shoulders and you kind of pay attention, like, oh my God, I'm so tight, that's a good indication that you're really stressed, right? So awareness is always the key. But the second thing that you can do is something physical. So when you get out of your car, maybe you do some push-ups, maybe you run around the car a few times. Just exerting your body, that's what the stress hormones are meant to do. So exerting your body is going to help expend that stress, expend those hormones and close off that stress cycle. A good cry will do the same thing. So if you think you've ever sat and sobbed and sobbed and sobbed, and then you stop and you feel better, you feel lighter, that ends the stress cycle. Screaming, yelling, punching, kicking, all of those things, not people, obviously, but all of those things can end the stress cycle. So if you scream into a pillow, that can actually be really therapeutic. We tend to not do these things because we don't want people to hear us, experiencing emotion. That's a whole other story, but we tend to kind of keep those things up locked in. But those are all valid ways to end the stress cycle. Exercise, so if you need to go for a run, if you need to go for a walk, that can be really helpful. Any sort of meditation or mindfulness, so being aware of what you're mindful about though, right? So make sure that you're spending some time, okay, I'm home from work, I'm safe, I'm here, I'm being mindful, I'm breathing, whatever it is, or combining those two, so yoga or Tai Chi or Qigong, any of those like movement plus meditation or mindfulness, that can be really helpful. Dr. Nagoski has some great resources in her book about burnout, but this is just a message I think that everybody needs to hear. We know that chronic stress is making us sick, and knowing that we can end that stress cycle, that we can break that hormone cycle to actually feel better, is the first step to making those changes. So I hope that you find this as interesting as I do. I can't wait to learn more about this with you. Let me know, how do you deal with stress? Do you have a really great way to end that stress cycle for yourself? And I'm always looking for new tips and resources for people.